Hey there, your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing to celebrate the 50 plus year history of tabletop role playing games. And I do that by inviting on interesting folks to have conversations, folks who have worked on popular tabletop role playing games over the years. Our first year was definitely D&D centric because it was the 50th anniversary of that game, which turns out to also be the 50th anniversary of tabletop role playing as a thing. But now that we're in our second year, I'm spreading the net a little wider, bringing people in who've done other work on other games too. And I'm just lucky that over the course of my career, I have worked with a lot of people, not just on D&D, but from a bunch of other companies. And I hope that you'll stay with us as we start talking to more broader range of people. And today, I've got someone who has done a lot of work for D&D, but also done a lot of work for other games. And I was thinking about it as I got ready for this week's episode, and I think that he may have written more core rule books than any person I know, or been part of the design of more core rule books for different games and variations of D20 and such than anyone I know. And they're not all like, oh, it's a little twist here. There's some pretty big twists that he made along the way, and fantastic stuff. Plus stuff that's not that at all. Other games entirely. So I think we're gonna have a very fun conversation. And I'm going to stop babbling here and bring him in. Hello, Michael J. Pastor, and hello, Birkenwood. Thank you both for showing up. Glad to see you. You're here just in time for me to bring on my guest, Steve Kenson. Hello,
Hi
Steve
there.
Kenson.
Hey Stan, how you doing?
Good. I'm good. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. I appreciate it
My
greatly.
pleasure.
Um, you and I met right around 2000, right around the D20 era, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Yes,
Um,
indeed.
so even that's half the history of gaming.
Yeah, right. I want to say one of my earliest I'm not sure if it's the first time we met, but one of my earliest memories of us talking and meeting was at a Saga system seminar at Gen Con.
Could well
Um,
be.
where I have very, very clear memories of you talking about a Watership Down Saga playtest game that I was just fascinated by.
That was a lot of fun. Jeff Quick, who's
Hmm.
I think you know, who
Yep.
was a guest on here a month or two ago, ran that at a MontyCon, where Monty
Hmm.
Cook used to once a year have a weekend long convention in his house, and Jeff ran a Watership Down, um, Bunnies and Burrows
Hmm.
saga game, and it was terrific. It was a lot of fun, but it was one of those things that showed me the range that game could have.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, we're going back a ways there.
Yeah. To be sure.
So I gave you a very tepid intro. Well, for folks who don't already know, why don't you do a little better job of it? Because no one sells you better than you.
Oh, that's totally a lie. Um, I'm terrible at selling myself, but I'll do
Can I
my
lower
best.
Steve's volume a tad? Is it really
Oh,
loud? Okay,
uh,
yes, I can.
I will also shift my mic
No,
the other way.
I've got it.
So,
I've got it set up very high because the guests sometimes come through weekly.
mm,
So
okay.
yeah,
Let me know if I'm
Michael, let me
I'm
know. Yeah, let me know if that needs
too
any
loud.
more adjusting. But
Um, gosh, let's see. Sell myself. I guess I can say that I have been doing this for a really long time, and I'm still doing it. So I must be doing something right
that's saying
so
something.
far as that goes. People keep paying me to do it, so that's the important thing. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned my working on a lot of core rule books, and I hadn't really realized. that is pretty true.
Yeah.
There are quite a few of them.
I mean, it's not something I associated with you until I was getting ready for this conversation. I started going
Hmm.
over all the things you did, and it's like, well, no, you started that, and you started that, and you started that, and there have been three of those, and you. It's like,
Right.
I what I the story I've told in a couple of conversations here is how when I first uh, got into the industry, I had misunderstood the terminology of what a game designer was, and I thought that a
Hmm.
designer was someone who makes the core game, and that people that did supplemental stuff were writers,
Hmm.
um, which hurt me a little bit in because I made that that mistake in a job interview, but
Mm.
but you're one of the few. I mean, and those of us who are designers, we feel lucky if we get to do one or two core games over the
Hmm.
course of our careers. A lot of it is keeping the wheels on,
Yeah.
and that's the part we love, right? That's not a knock on it, but you really had the opportunity to take several swings at that, and you've done some
Hmm.
really interesting stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, I really have. I owe a lot of that to working with Green Ronin as long as I have. Um, but and a lot of my design work has been for them. But also, just getting various freelance opportunities and chances to work on, some of my dream projects, which is nice.
So yeah, so before we get that, let's start with how gaming came into your life. What part of the U.S. You're from the
Hmm.
U.S.
Yep.
Originally? So where
Yeah.
did you grow up? What region?
That well, my dad worked for the Veterans Administration for
Okay.
most of his career, um, and he was Naval Reserve, and he was a pharmacist. Um, and so he got a lot of job transfers
Okay.
during my childhood. I used to think when I was a kid that the thing that kids did in the summer between school years was pack up the house and move to another school. Um, because that's what we did for a good chunk of my childhood, basically
Mm.
from the second grade until I was in the basically the finishing up the sixth grade. As we just moved every year. Um, and so I lived in a bunch of different places all around the country. Um, and I was um, not the most social kid, because I was always the new kid.
Mm.
Uh, and so it was always kind of hard to make friends. And I always felt like my friendships were pretty temporary, because I knew we were going to move, um,
Right.
sooner or later. Um,
It's very
and hmm?
so it's very emo.
I
Yeah,
know, right?
they're temporary.
But so I was also a real I was a bookworm. I was a real, I was the quiet kid who sat in the corner and read.
Right.
Um, and so it was no big surprise that I was into a lot of fantasy literature
Mm.
and mythology, and I got into comic books. Um, when we lived in a motel on the edge of Las Vegas one summer
Okay.
when my parents had moved to Vegas. We ended up living in a suburb called Henderson, right outside of
Mm.
the city. But we spent basically most of a summer living in a little motel called the Ponderosa Inn, as I remember. Um,
This is a sitcom writing itself.
it was, and so my parents, who I did not realize at the time, of course, were very harried and were house hunting, and my mom was job hunting, while my dad had a job and he was also working, and so my harried parents, were dealing with a bored pair, me and my brother, a bored pair
Mm.
of boys, in a tiny motel room. And so every once in a while, they would just give me some money and send me over to the 7-Eleven next door and say, go buy yourself some comic books or something. Like because if I had some comic books, I would
Yeah.
at least I'd shut up and read for a little while. Um, and that got me into just reading comics and picking up comics, and I discovered that things like comic book stores existed in
Right.
Vegas, and that was pretty much all she wrote as far as that went. Um, so by the time I was in the sixth grade, I was so I was a big bookworm. I was in bookstores all the time, and I saw this book in the bookstore called "The Deities and Demigods,"
Yeah.
um, and I was like, "Oh, like mythology is totally my jam. Like it's a mythology book I don't know." And I was reading through it, and I was like, "Wow, it's like all these different cultures and like this encyclopedia." But I'm like, "What are all these numbers for?"
They don't say a lot, but there are a lot of numbers.
There's a lot of numbers, and they don't make a whole lot of sense, and a lot of abbreviations,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure what this is for. Um, and I eventually sussed out, that role playing games were a thing.
Right.
Um, and I checked out at the very local bookstore we had their selection of games, and I convinced my mom to buy me the boxed set of the first edition of Gamma World,
Ooh.
which was the thing that caught my eye.
Yeah.
And I quickly talked my friends into playing it, um, and I pretty much sealed my fate as the forever game master right at that moment.
Yeah.
Because ever since I've been the guy in my friend group who has always been like, "Oh, there's this new game, we've got to play it," and they're like, "You're gonna run it, right?" Yes, you know,
If you want to play it, someone's got to run it.
someone's got to run it, you know. Um, and so we played Gamma World, uh, and we very quickly ran out of Gamma World adventures
Hmm.
because there were 3 or 4 of them, I think.
Right.
Um, and I had meanwhile picked up some D&D stuff, um, and so I transitioned our Gamma World game by having a dimensional portal send the characters to Greyhawk, and our mutant characters with their laser blasters and their mutant powers were just rampaging through, the lost caverns and the hidden shrine of Tamakan and whatnot. Um, and um, yeah, it was a blast, honestly. And so of course then we just transitioned to play D&D, and we basically just worked our way through the entire TSR catalog.
Michael
In
J.
the
Pastor says, important question: which version of Gamma World and which one is the best?
wow. Well, I started playing Gamma World with the first edition, the old gray boxed set,
Wow.
which I still have.
Wow.
Um,
That's awesome.
and it's that poor book is barely holding it together. Um, but I think, and I think my favorite edition of Gamma World is, and I'm gonna try and count because there have been
Yeah.
7, I
Number.
believe. Um, I think my favorite is the fourth, um, which is the one with the bat winged ob on the cover,
Right.
as I remember. Um, and, in terms of it's just sort of the way it all sort of held together.
Hmm.
Um, though I will say that the pick two things archetypes from seventh edition Gamma World is brilliant,
Right.
um, and was super fun all the times we've played it. Where it's just like your character is a, let's see, mechanical yeti. Like you just pick 2 things and that's your character.
Right.
You know, um,
So people, it seems to me that when I talk to people that are into Gamma World, they tend to break roughly into two categories. One
mhm,
is the kind that are like the Damnation Alley, apocalypse loving uh,
yep,
Gamma World fans, and the kind that are the I stand next to a nuclear waste dump so I can grow wings. Uh,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Wahoo.
I am definitely in the Wahoo Gamma
Yeah.
World camp
Okay.
as far as it goes.
Oh, Michael seems to feel very strongly about second edition. Well, that's good
That's
for you,
fair.
Michael. You hang in there, and you love that as much as you do.
The second edition box set had really great art, I will
Yeah.
say.
Okay, so did you stay through gaming all through your teens? Because that's another thing that I
Oh yeah.
found a lot of us have is at some point, either by choice or by losing their groups or by uh, discovering some other passion, gaming
Yep.
gets put aside for a while and then they come back. No.
Never. I have been like I am still my current gaming group in
Yeah.
person. I have two gaming groups. I have one online and one in person group locally. My in person gaming group still includes someone I knew from who I went to high school with, um, who joined our game group um, when I was in high school. Um,
Awesome.
and most of the other members of that group I have been gaming with since college, which was
Okay.
quite some time ago.
All right. I'm going to start doing some drawing as we continue to talk here and switch
Yeah.
over so folks can see. I'm going to be doing an homage to a book that you had a fair amount to do with, the Super Team
Hmm.
Handbook. This is going to be my first non fantasy, I think.
Oh, I'm honored.
I did last week was my first non D and D.
Hmm.
Like I said in the opening, I'm starting to spread out, and I also, as anyone who's listened over this year knows, I have a great love of the superhero games, and
Yeah.
so I'm very excited about this. All right, so you went to college. You just mentioned that.
Hmm.
What did you
I did.
study?
I majored in communications at the University of New Hampshire. I originally wanted to be a journalist. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so I studied media communications. I also studied a fair amount of marketing, um, and I ended up minoring in history, kind of accidentally,
Right.
um, because I fell in love with the courses taught by the head of the history department,
Okay.
and I ended up taking so many history electives that he basically he sort of politely nudged me one day and says, "You know, you have enough credits for a minor. You probably should apply for that." I was like, "Oh, okay," because
Sure.
it turned out I really enjoyed history a lot.
I've
Um,
done it already. I should probably get the credit.
right? Um, uh, and so yeah, I intended to become a reporter, basically a journalist, and the like. And working my internships for it revealed to me that I was not
Hmm.
well suited to it
What? So
as
what
far as
is
that
it
went.
that? I mean, not to pry too deeply. Not that I don't want to turn this into let's psychoanalyze Steve Kenson. But
Hmm.
what was it that
Well,
that let you know that so quickly?
working for local newspapers in New Hampshire, it was the journalistic voice was very dry. And there wasn't a lot of room for um, the kind of creative writing I
Right.
enjoyed. And I know now, in retrospect, that that's you know sort of small town newspaper more than the issue with being with journalism itself. There are obviously lots of journalists who are very creative and engaging writers, and I probably would have figured that out had I stuck with it. Um, but instead, I ended up answering an ad for a tech startup in the area, and became their marketing manager slash office manager because it was a tiny little startup. I was, in fact, their first employee,
Huh.
um, right out of college. And um, that was also, educational in its own way.
So
Uh,
you were what for them? You
Basically, I was primarily hired to be their creative marketing guy,
hmm
because it was a tech startup and the principals were very technical, and not especially good with the creative
hmm
stuff with the words and the communication and all of that. And so that was to be my role. And I found out as things progressed that I was pretty good at it, but it was one of those things that I discovered that the tech principles of the company considered more of a necessary evil than something they valued. Um,
Oh,
I
principle.
remember I remember being complimented that I was pretty smart for a guy with a bachelor with an arts degree. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I'd certainly have run into my fair share of that. I mean, I don't like you know what I don't like to go negative on lots of things, but one
Right.
of the things when Wizards and TSR merged,
Hmm.
the R&D culture at Wizards had been very math major heavy, and because of magic and what magic is and
Right.
how and what's needed for that.
Right.
And we brought in a whole bunch of literature majors, a whole bunch of,
Mhm.
and
Right.
there was more than a little bit of, you know, I don't mean it in a really negative way. It's not like it was bitter rivalry
Hmm.
or confrontation, but there was definitely worldview in conflict a lot.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, there definitely was.
um, all right, so you were doing that. When did you start writing? Going from just being someone who was gaming, someone who was
Hmm.
making game product.
It was around that time. So my my gaming group was, continuous, throughout high school and then college and then after
Right.
college. And some members rotated through and moved away and whatnot, and folks were, um, but the core of the group continued on, and and so in the very early 90s, our group was really into both Torg from West End
Mm-hmm.
Games,
Which,
which we
if having worked
which we
on at West End, I'm familiar with that.
which we played a lot of, and Shadowrun,
Okay.
which was our big obsession. And I was on the very early days of the internet at that point. Um, and FASA had a forum on the Genie Network, which was run by General Electric, um, and it was a dial-up text-based, you know, basically bulletin board slash
Yeah.
forum, um, and they did an initial playtest for the second edition of Shadowrun on there. And I was a very, very enthusiastic playtester, with a lot to say, um, and um, I made a lot of suggestions, and Tom Dowd, who was the Shadowrun developer at the time, liked enough of them to incorporate a few things, and he had he had someone drop out, as happens on a
Yeah.
freelance project, and said, and so he emailed me and he said, "Hey, I need somebody to, basically sort of do an emergency job to write like 1,000 words, for this Shadowrun source book we're working on that's going to follow the second edition rule book. Would you like to do it?" And I was like, "Yes, please. Like I would love to do that." And what? You'll pay me? Like even better,
Wait, there's money involved?
right? Like people do this for money. Um,
That, you know what? That's another interesting thing that's come up. I've been very fascinated to hear different people's uh, the time when they realized someone gets paid for this.
right. I mean, I guess I always knew that because somebody had to be making the books and all that,
Right.
but you know, um, and so I wrote this. It's probably the most I've agonized over 1,000 words in my whole career. I wrote it over that weekend. I sent it in. Tom liked it. He used it, and he started, pitching me other small freelance projects. I did a Shadowrun adventure after that,
Mhm.
and um, uh, that just sort of started to sort of steamroll into doing a bunch of other stuff. Um, and after, I guess it would be about, you know, year and a half of freelancing. I was doing, I was writing pretty much in my, all my spare time.
Right.
And I got my first novel contract with FASA to write a Shadowrun novel. Um, and I did that thing they tell you not to do, and I quit my day job. Uh, you know, because I was really just sick and tired of it, and um, in hindsight, was probably not the smartest thing to do, but uh,
I don't know.
you
Worked
know,
out in the end.
it worked out okay in the end, and I started basically freelancing full time, and looking for doing branching out and doing work for other companies and getting more gigs and over the next few years, I probably worked for everybody in the industry at one point or another, um, and did a lot of different projects. And um, then in 2000, the third edition D&D happened. Um, the whole landscape of the industry changed.
Yeah.
Um, I was involved. My game group was one of the many that were playtesting third edition because I loved to playtest things.
Hmm.
Um, and so I got my first gigs doing in the D20 boom. After that, doing stuff for Green Renine because they were looking for projects for freelancers and to expand their D20 line. And so I sent them, pitches for things. And I did 4 or 5 D20 source books for them early on. And, um, and that was a great working relationship. Um, we, during that time, I had uh, not long before that, I had had a freelance project to design a superhero setting for a publisher that was doing some champions stuff.
Yeah.
And as sometimes happens, the deal fell through. The publisher decided they weren't going to do the project. Um, and the material I had written reverted to me, and I just kind of tinkered with it as a side project. Um, I my partner still says, "Are you working on work or fun work?" When I'm at my keyboard, because it's like, is this something someone is paying you for, or are you just doing gaming things for fun? because it's hard to tell the difference from the
and,
outside.
and one sometimes turns into the other.
Yes, and one often turns to, as was in fact the case with this. I worked on this setting for a while and tinkered with it and expanded it and all of that stuff. And I was emailing back and forth with Chris Pramus, the president of Green Ronin, and saying, Chris, it's a shame. I've got this, like whole superhero setting that I have like fleshed out and built out, and it's a whole book worth of material that I can't pitch to anybody because at the time there was this weird desert in superhero RPG publishing where literally no one was publishing.
Right,
All the superhero games were out of print or moribund. Hero and Champions were in legal limbo, and everything else was licensed or the like. And I was like, I got nothing. Like, there's nobody I could pitch it to.
mm,
Um, and Chris was like, well, we're expanding the D20 line. Why don't you send it to me and I'll look? And I said, sure. Send him a copy. He read it. He read it over, and he said, "I'll tell you what. We'll cut you a 2-book deal if you want to design a superhero game uh, using the D20 rules, the open game license for this setting. We'll publish the core rule book for the game, and we'll publish your setting book." And I was like, "Oh, does it have to be D20? Like, really? Like, okay. I mean, I really do want to publish this book, so I'll look at it." I'm like, "Oh, I'll take a look." I was dubious about the idea, honestly.
right,
Um, I was like, "But all right, sure." And so I spent some time with the system resource document and just tore everything apart and played around with just how to tinkered with how to do things. And I put together a proposal for what would eventually become Mutants and Masterminds. And it was a discussion because my proposal was like, okay, I think we can do this, but the way I want to do it, we can't use the D20 logo because it won't be D&D compatible. Because I want to change some things and not do them exactly the way D&D does them.
right,
It'll be the core of the system, and a lot of the stuff will still be the same, but some stuff will be different. And at that point, nobody had done that.
right,
It was all about being able to put the D20 logo on your product to show that you were supporting third edition to get those crossover and sales. Um, but Green Ronin was game to do it, and so we went ahead.
let me just pause there because I
Yeah.
think there are people, and I'm going to pause drawing because I don't think I can. I One of the reasons I do this as homages is I can't come up with new ideas and new words at the same time, new pictures and
Right.
new words at the same time. But if I'm adapting someone else's, I can have our conversation. But
Hmm.
if I'm really going to think and say something meaningful, I can't be drawing while I do it. So uh, I think there's a lot of people who are new to the industry in the last 25 years who don't really understand. So I just want to do a quick when third edition came out, they released the D20 license. They released the SRD, which
Yep.
was the basic mechanics that were open. It was the open gaming system. What has become the open gaming license, the OGL, when people
Yeah.
talk about that. And they also released what was called the D20 license, which
Hmm.
gave you a logo that you could use, but it was more restrictive
Right.
than what went into the OGL. So what you're saying here is that most people were wanted to use the D20 license because they felt that that's what was getting them recognized and making sales for them, and
Hmm.
that meant they had to stick to D&D very closely, and there were a lot more restrictions. what you
Yeah.
proposed used the core set of mechanics which was in the OGL,
Right.
but you wanted to do new things which would the D20 license forbid forbade,
Right.
so that
Yes.
it would not get that logo, but it would still use the heart of the mechanics.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right,
Exactly.
right. I mean, I know we understand that, but I just want to make sure
Right.
anyone who's younger than 25 or 30 has a chance to not get lost in this conversation. So
Yes.
back to it.
Yes. So we ended up doing just that. We did the first edition of Mutants and Masterminds. We did the first edition of the Freedom City source book, and it turned out people thought they were pretty cool. Um, and after a while, I did additional pitches and additional work, and Green Erneen had me out at Gamma Trade Show, and uh, asked me if I wanted to come on full time to run to develop Mutants and Masterminds as a line because the sales were doing really well. Um, and so I did that. I started working for Green Ronine full time as a developer. Interestingly, my first development project was actually not Mutants and Masterminds, but was uh, Blue Rose romantic fantasy role playing.
Which is
Um,
another game that you wrote the core for. So
yeah, uh, it was another one of those. It was a project that was kind of stuck in limbo. And I, came on board, and Chris was basically like, "Here, fix this," like make this go. Um, and that was the project that where I met Jeremy Crawford, because
mm,
Jeremy was the freelance editor who was working on that book. And Jeremy and I had a initial. I still remember to this day, had our initial phone conversation because I was in New England and Jeremy was in California at the time.
mm-hmm.
Um, and we had our initial phone conversation about the project, and Jeremy was basically started off with, like, give me your frank assessment of this, you know. And I did, and I said, it's not. It needs a lot of work. I said, it's not. It can't be released in the shape that it's in. And he was like, "Oh, thank God," because he had been trying to edit his way out of, you know, uh, a thing that just was not coming together, um, in the current state it was in. And he felt like he was the only one who was aware of the problem. Uh,
No one else could
uh,
see it.
um, and so we ended up working together to really heavily rework things, and we had a great time on
Now,
that
was that these are
project.
mechanical problems that were going on with it?
It was a little of both, honestly. It was the 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 book had originally been conceived of as more another one of those sort of D20 logo projects and
Right.
more of a sort of a D&D source book, and it didn't really work that way very well. Um, and so mechanically, it needed a, a stronger core, and it needed some setting elements to go with that. And so Jeremy and I did a lot of reworking of things. I again pitched the idea of like making it a standalone core book, using some of the lessons design stuff that I'd done on Mutants and Masterminds
Right.
in that, um, and uh, we did a lot of reworking and redesign, and rebuilding of it. And it was another one of those really fun projects. We also had Stephanie Laws
Mm.
gorgeous art
Yes.
to
Yes.
serve as our inspiration back in the halcyon days when Stephanie was freelancing and RPG companies could afford to hire her,
Mm.
um, which was great. um, and so yeah, it was a great
So
project. It was a lot of work.
this strikes me a question that I
Yeah.
don't know the answer to, and I wanted to from time to time ask you. So
Mm,
the changes that went into um, Mutants and Masterminds,
yeah.
uh, and Blue, and then some of those went into Blue Rose,
Yep.
and then there was also True 20, which was kind of a
Yep.
generalization of somewhere in the middle between all that. How
Yeah.
did what are it for the audience? If you could just kind of
Yeah.
number a couple of what are the things you poked at to make those
Hmm.
differences, and
Sure.
how did it come together?
So the key thing in Mutants and Masterminds that a lot of stuff got built around was the notion of replacing hit points with a damage resistance roll. We had initially called it a damage saving throw. Um, that basically determined, by how well or how poorly you rolled, how badly damaged your character was.
Right,
Um, it wasn't tremendously innovative in the sense that other RPGs had certainly done, like roll dice to determine how badly damaged your character is. Um, but it was definitely the first time that I remember basically taking D&D's third edition's then saving throw mechanics and applying them to things other than things you normally roll the saving throw against.
right,
um, and largely that was just because the scale of superhero stuff um, from the D&D perspective just involved way too many dice.
right,
um, I appreciate a big handful of dice as much as the next gamer, but I just found, having to you know, roll 12 to 15 d6 and add up, all of that for damage, was just a little much. And so I felt like it also allowed for that sort of swinginess that you get in superhero conflicts, where sometimes somebody gets knocked out in one hit, and sometimes
hmm
seems like it takes forever. Um, and so a bunch of other things kind of built up around that. The point based modular character creation stuff, and stuff that was a little less class based. Um, And then in the Blue Rose application, it was things that were character classes, but there were fewer of them and they were more customizable and using the similar damage mechanics and using some of the stuff that I had designed for the Psychic's Handbook for Green Ronin for a skill based sort of psychic power system that was also very much in genre for romantic fantasy, including that in there. And then Blue Rose took off and people really liked it, but there was definitely a split between the people who really liked and really, like grooved on the setting versus the people who are just like, oh, this system is kind of interesting.
right.
Like, I'd like to use it for other things, maybe for a different fantasy game or something like that. Is there somewhere I can get, you know, this system without the other stuff? Because I don't care about that. And Green Ronin was like, well, maybe there's a market for a generic sort of rule book for this system. And so I designed that, um, and that was True 20, and that was the notion of trying to build that out into a sort of more generic RPG system, than Blue Rose was. Um, but that also wasn't Mutants and Masterminds, um, and was still class based and had a bit more of a sort of class and level based advancement in character
Right.
design. So it was definitely, especially in those days, really about reacting to whatever um, the market seemed to be doing, and where people's interest seemed to be, and what the next thing was, uh, as far as that went. Eminem was always pretty steady, and we did a second edition a few years after the first that allowed me to do um, a lot more design, honestly, with just a tremendous amount of hindsight. Having
Right.
worked on like 3 or 4 core books by that point, um, and really, cleaned things up a lot. And Yeah, and it was a lot of just, kind of moving on to whatever thing was next.
um, so my background in role playing, like so many people, D&D. Uh,
Hmm.
Gamma World was not my first thing. D&D was my
Yeah.
first thing, but it's not where I went off the deep end. Like I
Hmm.
couldn't play D&D a lot. I played it for a while, and then I lost a group. I just didn't have it. When I got to play again, um, through stories I've told already and don't really matter for your purposes, we wound up villains and vigilantes was it because I also was a big
Oh,
comic book
yes,
person. Um,
yes.
and yeah, anyone who's watched the show, I don't want to tell the story again because I'll lose viewers over it. But they don't want to hear it again. But that was where I cut my amateur design teeth,
Hmm.
where I learned my
Yeah.
skills of. But I also I learned a lot because I had played D&D and I had written adventures that I ran a
Hmm.
few things through. But fantasy games and superhero games are just different narratively, and
Yes.
that it has to roll over into the mechanics.
Hmm.
I mean, it seems to
Yeah, I
me,
agree.
right, that fantasy games you're always going to kill your opponent. Right,
Right.
you're gonna fight until everyone's dead. And in superhero games, if you're doing if you're doing it to get that comic booky feeling, at least the big boss is
Hmm.
going to get away a few times. You're going to have these
Yeah.
huge fights where you walk away with nothing. In fact, the point is you walk away
Yeah.
with a bitter taste of defeat in your mouth. But the game has to
Yes.
roll forward. You have to somehow.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so I guess now I've said a lot instead of asking a question. Bad interviewer.
Well,
What?
that's funny actually that you bring that up because one of the things from first to second edition Mutants and Masterminds that really played into that exact thing was the way we did hero points. Um, Hero points started out in first edition as just this, bank of resources that you
Mm,
started out the game with, just like a lot of a ton of other games that had similar resource mechanics. Um, and you would just use them to do your heroic stuff and to deal with the occasional bad die roll and those sorts of things.
right.
Um, and that was fine. But I came up with this idea that I introduced into my own game to try it out. And it was to reverse the way that the hero points worked, so that they worked in line with the comic book narrative, which was basically that the characters started out with practically no hero points. They just started out with one, and as the game progressed, as the characters encountered setbacks and complications and brought their various, sort of superhero melodrama into things,
Hmm.
they would earn hero points for basically all of the bad stuff their characters had to go through,
Right.
um, so that by the end of the adventure, they would have this big pile of hero points and they would confront the bad guy, and it would be just this big blowout. Because I also made it so that you couldn't save them. to the next game,
Right.
you had to use them. So at the big climatic ending, it would be just like use up all your hero points. You may as well use them, or lose them. Um, and
Can't take them all.
that was that was partly inspired by a friend of mine who was just a notorious point hoarder.
Yeah.
um, I grew to really dislike game systems that use the same currency for character in-game resources as well as their advancement.
Right.
Um, like you can spend XP to, you know, change your die rolls and things like that, but if you do, you don't have XP anymore. Um, and this this friend of mine was just like so tight-fisted with his points. He would let the rest of us die in game before he would ever spend one. We would beg him, like, "Come on, man," you know. And so I was like, I am never going to design something where you have to make the choice between like saving these things to advance your character versus spending them in the game.
Right.
Um, and that approach to hero points actually just worked so much better in terms of the superhero narrative.
Hmm.
It really encouraged players to lean into their losses, to even come up with reasons why their characters would have setbacks and problems, to have their weaknesses come into play, or to, again, you don't have to worry about their maiden aunt or their, second cousin, or, whatever, those kinds of things. So, yeah, it
Uh,
is very different kind of style of narrative.
okay. Just looking. We're at about 50 minutes in. Okay. I just like to keep my eye on that.
Hmm.
So, I don't know. Do you want to keep going through your career, or do you want to kind of break out and talk about some of the things? Like, I'd be very interested. Nowadays, Mutants and Masterminds has been around,
Hmm.
has a lot of has a strong following and a long history.
Hmm.
And you guys do a weekly show. I'm going to plug out to that on Mondays.
Yes.
Mutant and Mastermind Mondays, Mumamu, on the Green
Yes.
Ronin YouTube
Hmm.
and other
Yep.
platforms. If you're liking this and you're enjoying the conversation, go check them out on Monday afternoons. Green
Hmm.
Ronin Publishing on YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, what uh, and and you came into it with a good strong background and knowledge about superheroes.
Hmm. Oh,
Um,
yeah. I've been a giant superhero geek since I
yeah.
was like 11. So,
So what do you what do you think you learned over the course of the couple of editions, or the third edition now of
yeah.
Mutants and Master?
Eminem has been in its third edition since 2011.
Yeah.
So it has been its longest edition to date. Um, and gosh, what have I learned? A lot.
Yeah,
um,
I mean that's kind of a sucker question. Leaves it
right.
way too open for you, but
I guess, I mean, as far as Mutants and Masterminds itself is concerned, I have learned that there are, especially in a system that has a lot of open design elements to it, that there are often a lot of different ways to do the same thing, or different ways to approach the same thing. And sometimes one is not necessarily inherently better,
right.
and you just have to pick one, so far as that goes. Um, and I have found that Eminem obviously tends a little more towards the sort of crunchy side of
Mhm.
things. There are a lot of nuts and bolts for people who like um, character design and character building. Um, which is great, and I have found honestly is kind of a hobby unto itself.
Yeah.
Um, but I have also found that sometimes it's just um, not worrying about all of that quite so much, um, and trying to convey the the notion, and I've said it multiple times on Eminent Mondays as well. Trying to convey the notion that especially for the game masters, because I'm always on the game master side,
Right.
um, that they don't have to do the kind of work that we do in terms of putting together a character for a book.
Hmm.
Um, you can just throw together some numbers, and as long as they fit within the power level guidelines, you're fine. And if the you don't have to even add the points up, because nobody's coming along to check your math, and no one cares how much the character costs, especially if they're a villain
I
or
wish
an
I wish
NPC.
there was more acceptance of that, not just in the superhero world. I mean, we certainly struggled
Yeah.
with that in third edition. We built this game that and taught the world that you had to be precise with the numbers, um,
Hmm.
and I think that was something that bit us on the ankles and higher
Mm.
a lot. Um, what
Yeah.
you know what I've talked about this with other people. Fourth edition D&D has a lot of problems
Hmm.
from a not even mechanically, but in appearing in the D&D line of editions.
Hmm.
But it did address that problem. Like it really did get down to
Sure did.
and it did it in some really elegant ways.
There's a lot of really interesting design in fourth edition.
Yeah,
I learned a lot from playing that game, honestly.
yeah, me
Um,
too.
yeah.
It's not the game that I was saying this a couple of weeks ago. It's not the game that I look for when I'm sitting down to play D&D, but it's a
Hmm.
game I appreciate and I
Yep.
do like. It is the um, so I was saying it was oh no, sorry, old brain is happening and my nouns are dropping out. But it's it is a kind of game I love a lot,
Yes.
and it's a really good version of that.
If fourth edition had been a completely new fantasy
Yes,
game, I think that it would have done. I think it would have had much greater acceptance than if it didn't have to deal with the cognitive dissonance of people who are like, but this isn't D&D.
right. Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with that. Unfortunately, Wizards would never produce that game.
Mm, yeah, yeah.
it
Um, I noticed that Michael asked if Wildcards was an M&M
Oh
product,
yes,
and yes, we did do a Wildcards source book for the second edition of the game. That actually was how um, uh, we at Green Ravine met George Martin. Um, we George approached us about the Wildcards license because the books were coming back into print at that time, and some new stuff was in the works. And we ended up having dinner with him at New York Comic Con, as I remember,
mm,
and talking about um, licensing opportunities and the like. And the and I was a Wildcards fan from way back. I read all of the original books when they come out, and the like. So I was totally psyched to work on a licensed version. And that project led to us getting the Song of Ice and Fire license, and doing Song of Ice and Fire role playing, which is also a really fun project.
yeah, Michael. I apologize. Michael sent in. Michael's one of our. He subscribes to our free newsletter, 50 years in the dungeon.substack.com, which I'm going to flash up
Which, of
there.
course, everyone should do.
Everyone should. It's free, And as a subscriber, you get to send in questions ahead of time, and he sent that wild cards question in beforehand. So, Michael, I apologize for making you have to ask it again, but there you go. We still
Yeah,
got it answered.
absolutely.
One of the other questions he asked is whether you've ever done any straight up comic book writing.
Curiously, I haven't. Um, and I
Would you
don't
like to?
know. I honestly, I would. Hmm, I'd like to feel I could, which I guess is a different thing. I have a curious relationship with fiction writing.
Yeah.
Um, I have I have 9 published novels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Yet I haven't written
As
a
someone with
novel
two, I'm
in
very impressed by
yet I haven't written one in well over 10 years
that. Yeah.
at this point. And I discovered that I don't know. I just discovered that I don't have it. I'm not cut out for fiction writing.
Mm,
Um, I can do it, um, but it's for me it's a lot harder. Um, I know other people for whom it's the exact opposite. That
right.
writing narrative and dialogue and all of that is super easy for them. And for me, it's really hard. Um, I can do it, but I don't enjoy it as much as my game writing. Um, and so I think that I think I am in some ways too much of a systems and settings kind of guy. I definitely can do narrative in adventure building, and that's as close as I get to doing good fiction narrative. But so
It's
yeah, I
I'm I love talking or thinking about and talking about the differences between the two.
hmm
As again,
yeah, because
someone
they are
who's
very
done
different.
both, yeah. There's a part of it that is really similar, and then it diverges wildly.
Yes.
You start conceptually very similar, but as you were saying, with fiction, with or comic book, anything you're actually
hmm
telling the story. You have to
Yeah.
decide exactly what happens, and you're responsible for making the conducting the whole thing so that it
hmm
comes out as a symphony. And
Yeah.
you're when you're writing a game, maybe, you know what, I like the food analogy better. That you're putting together a meal that everyone's going to eat, and it's going to have to be a good
hmm
introduction, appetizer,
Yeah.
main candidate through dessert. And when you're putting together a game product or an adventure, something that's going to go out into that
hmm
world, you are making a a, a buffet. You're giving
hmm
them all the things that they want to add a little. They want to do is go have the roast beef. They can have all the roast beef.
That's fine. Yep.
Um, and so you've got to prepare more things, but you don't you don't have to make sure that each taste is gonna.
hmm
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a good metaphor in there, and I haven't figured it out
But I hear what you mean, as far as that goes. And I agree, Michael, the plot in games is very much emergent. And it comes out of the process of playing. Um, and obviously stories are, fixed in that regard that, there is a plot and here it is. Um, I somebody said at one point, and I wish I remembered who, that stories in TTRPGs are the things you tell after the game.
yet.
Um, the story happens in retrospect. It's the story about what happened. But it emerges from the process of playing the game.
Yeah, which is why you can get together at conventions and talk with everyone who played the same module or
hmm
adventure, and
Yep.
you can have fun saying we did this, well we did that.
Yeah. 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 That was one of the things I think that Wizards realized in fifth edition was that one of the big elements of gaming culture was that sort of shared experience, of you all had the same adventures, but they all went in your own particular way, and having those, sort of stories of, well, how did you, deal with this, you know, challenge, or did you get caught by that trap, or,
Yeah,
that
I mean
sort of
it's
thing.
interesting in that they've been aware of that. I mean that was one of the discussions we were having way back in third edition.
Hmm.
It's refining the question, and
Yeah.
that shared experience was definitely something that got talked a lot about during each of third, fourth, and fifth edition to the
Hmm.
sign.
Yeah.
Just taking what we learned from the previous editions and saying, "Oh well, we could do it better like this," or "Oh yeah, we did get that part," but like you're saying, it's
Yeah.
we need to pay a little more attention to the fact that it's really their game.
Yeah, very much, very much. Uh, Michael, I really agree. I love the parallel universe metaphor, for people's different games that are all set in the same world. It's especially appealing for superheroes because the whole
Mm-hmm.
multiverse notion that every superhero universe ends up embracing, and then rejecting, and then embracing, and then rejecting. Um, you know, it's so much a part of the genre, that it would be really interesting to do more. And it's always something I've always kind of played on, the idea of that, everybody's interpretation of a given superhero setting is their parallel universe version of it. So there could be as many different interpretations as we want.
Were you? I mean, this is a question I maybe should have asked earlier. Were you more of a
Mhm.
Marvel or a DC kid?
I was more of a DC kid at first. Um, and then, I mean, I read them both, you know,
Right.
um, but definitely was more of a DC kid to start. Um, then then more of a Marvel, and it's kind of went back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. You know,
Yeah. I mean, I and my friends were omni consumers of comics too.
yeah,
But in the end, you you usually do. You wind up with one being the one that most gravitates. It
yeah,
sticks in your heart.
yeah. I hear
It's the
that.
universe that you're trying to recreate with your role playing
Mm,
game.
yeah, yeah. I
um,
would say so.
okay, we're starting to come up. But the other thing I wanted to bring up, because I love it so much, is that you did another superhero game.
Yes, I get no end of teasing from uh, Green Renine about that, um, because it's now we just joke. It's that I could stop anytime. You know, I do not have a problem,
Except you can't.
uh,
Yeah.
except I can't. Yeah. Um, and yeah, I remember when Icons was another one of those. It was fun work. It was one of those things that I was just doing for fun,
Hmm.
um, because I had a bunch of ideas, that I wanted to mess around with, um, and it was the big ones were, I was I liked, Stephen O'Sullivan's design for Fudge.
Hmm.
Um, for folks who are not aware, which was a really interesting sort of universal, fairly light game system, but surprisingly robust. And Stefan is a fellow New Hampshireite. We actually met at a con, upstate some years ago, and I was particularly interested in the Fudge's attempt to try and use more narrative terms than numbers, for a bunch of things, um, and how that sort of matched up with Jeff Grubb's Marvel superheroes
Right.
design, that also used narrative terms for a lot of the ability levels, and the like. And harkening back to Villains and Vigilantes, which was my
Hmm.
first superhero role playing game, as well. Um, the notion of randomly rolling up superhero characters, um, because I was really at that time super into the creative boundary space of sort of uh, random creation, and the
Right.
springboard element of just that sort of thing. And so I was playing around with it, and I in all of my playtest games, I had people roll up characters because that was a big part of the experience, the idea I was messing around with. And it was really just fascinating the way you could hand a player a random pile of abilities and powers that are often somewhat mismatched. Um, a couple of rules that allowed them to, kind of cheat, at least sort of change things around a little bit.
Right.
Um, and then say, make up a superhero based on this. And people would come up with the most amazing ideas and would say up front, like, I would have not in a million years, if you had sat me down with a blank piece of paper and said, make up a superhero, have come up with this. But given
Yeah.
these restrictions and this list of things that I had to pull together, this is what I came up with, and I loved that. That was just really great. Um, and uh, it was, one of those things. I was just messing with it for quite a while, and then Gareth Skarka from Adamant Entertainment um, said on some industry forum or another, um, basically that he was looking to do a superhero game, um, and he basically described what I had been
Yeah.
working on. And I wrote him an email and I said, Gareth, it's funny you should mention that because I basically have designed that game.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and we started talking about it. And Michael talks about the 2010 Icons book,
Yeah.
which is the slim one with the red cover. That is the first edition that Adamant put out. Um, and unfortunately, although it was pretty well received, and we did a handful of adventures and the like afterwards, um, uh, Adamant didn't have the resources to focus on everything they were doing, and Icons kind of fell by the wayside. And so I ended up getting it back, and did my own, what I called the assembled edition of it. That would be the one.
I thought I had
Um,
both of them on this shelf, but it turns out I just have this one.
um, and that one has been around since 2015, I believe. Um,
I'm gonna stop drawing now. We're a little past the hour. I
it's
also
looking
hear thunder
pretty
in the
good.
distance, which reminds me that
Uh oh.
we're having weather here in the Pacific Northwest, and that doesn't happen very often. So
Right.
I want to try not to have this cut out before we
Cut
finish.
short.
But if I come back over here, I can also pull up uh, stevekenson.com, which is where one might go to find out more about things like icons. And
Yes. That is my occasionally updated website. That is mostly icons things and occasionally, hey, I'm going to be at this convention, um, and occasionally other bits of news when I actually remember to put it on the website. But folks can see all of that stuff, my bibliography, bunch of my articles and other stuff that's up on the site. I recommend if folks are into superhero stuff, I did a bunch of articles called Reanimated years ago,
hmm,
where I went and watched episodes of superhero animated series,
sweet,
and then broke them down and said, what does this tell us about superhero game design? And how would you do this anyways in a superhero game, sort of a thing. And I did that for Justice League and for Young Justice and for at least the first season of Avengers, I
nice,
think. So there's a
nice.
bunch of those. if you want to watch me nerd out about superhero gaming and superheroes.
Who doesn't? They might also be interested, and I don't have a tag for this. It might also be interested in your Patreon if you
Ah,
like
yes.
icons stuff and superhero nerditry.
See, this is where we get back to the whole "I'm terrible at selling myself" thing, uh, where I would have gone unprompted and never mentioned my Patreon at all.
That's what I'm
Um,
here for.
yes. Um,
Is that just patreon.com/Steve Kenson?
yep, that is it.
Right.
These days, the Patreon is monthly icons content, and has been for the past 4 years. Um, this year, I am doing a series monthly. I am calling Adventure Archetypes, where I'm taking a classic superhero adventure plot, idea, what have you,
Mm,
and basically just looking at how to build all sorts of variations on it. I started off with robberies, and have moved on to my second one was adventures where the heroes shrink. Um,
right.
and I think that the next one is going to be invasions, um, and where things invade.
Right.
So I have those planned out for the rest of the year for
Sweet.
folks who are interested in that kind of thing.
Yes. So stevekenson.com, um, patreon.com/Steve Kenson. Remember Steve Kenson and just go looking for it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty much the only Steve Kenson on the internet that I know of. So
So I usually wrap up kind of. We've covered a lot here, and
right,
we still haven't covered all of Steve Kenson, which also is a thing that happens every week. We don't get through everything we want.
right.
But uh, we have covered the idea of developing a game through several different iterations here
Hmm.
in the last half of the history of role playing. what 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 do you think we're going to see in the next iterations of games going forward? What are the trends you think we might?
That's always hard to predict, honestly. Um,
Yeah, but I'm
I
not going to hold
think
you.
no, that's true. Um, I I do think that we are in a remarkably creative phase of things where there's a lot more experimentation, and there's a lot more folks who are just sort of striking. I mean, the open license, I don't think people who weren't around for it understand how big the notion of open licensed and open sourced game systems was for the industry,
Yeah.
and just how much it changed everything. um, and although that's still very much a force in the industry, I think that we are definitely seeing a lot of folks who are also just doing their own thing,
Mm-hmm.
and are willing to just strike out and do their weird pet idea for a game. Certainly, things like Drive Through RPG and itch.io,
Mm.
and other marketplaces are creating just a renaissance of game publishing, because so many more creators can self-publish, and things like Patreon and Kickstarter
Right.
and other sorts of resources. You're just seeing a ton of new stuff that's getting out there, and it's really very cool to see in that regard. The gamer in me loves it. The game designer in me is like, oh, more competition. Um, but that's what keeps us sharp, I suppose.
So before we start to wrap up, I started with this, and we've touched on it a bunch. Let's count how many core books you've done.
Gosh. Uh, all right, let's see.
Let's see.
Um, uh, the first core book I worked on professionally was the third edition of Shadowrun.
Okay.
I wrote at least one chapter of that, so that counts. Um, so then,
I would have loved to just talk about Shadowrun from that era, but guess I'll
Yeah,
have to
I
have
know,
you
me
back.
too. Yeah, I could do a whole episode just talking about Shadowrun. And I think I didn't work on a core book, like a core book, core book after
Hmm.
that until Blue Rose.
Okay.
Um, so Blue Rose, Mutants and Masterminds, first edition. No, I take that back. Mutants Masterminds, then Blue Rose, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um, True 20,
20.
Mutants and Masterminds, second edition. Um, what is after that? Um, I know Song of Ice and Fire role playing is in there. Now we're starting to get a little vague in our timeline.
Yeah, we don't have to do them in necessarily in order.
Right, in order. Um, and then certainly Fantasy Age, Modern Age, um, Song of Ice and Fire role playing,
It
The
has
Expanse,
Expanse.
um, uh, Trinity Continuum Aberrant. I was lead design on that.
That's a core.
Um,
That's a core game on its own.
it's well, it's yeah, technically it's a supplement because Trinity is the core game. It's kind of a hybrid.
All right. There we
Um,
go. That's 10 right there. That's 10. Bing, bing, bing,
yeah,
bing, bing. Icon 11.
icons, both
Both
editions.
editions
Eminem
is
3,
12.
right? Eminem 3,
Eminem 3. There's there. So we got at
yeah,
least a baker's dozen of core books.
yeah,
Not a bad career, and you've
not
got
bad.
plenty to go.
Yeah, I've still hopefully got a good number of core books left in me.
All right. So what's the next superhero game? Oh wait, no. We'll save
So,
that for next
right.
time. Dragon Age. He says. Were
Yep.
you? Yeah.
I did do some design on Dragon Age. Yeah, not a lot. That was
It
mostly
was
Chris
mostly
Pramus's
Chris, right?
project. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm talking to Chris. Those audience. I'm talking to Chris Pramus about coming on and being a guest.
Awesome.
He seems up for it. This year is the 25th anniversary of Green Ronin as a company,
Yeah,
so
indeed.
they've got a lot to celebrate. I'll try and get Steve Kenson is our first Green Ronin visitor, but certainly not our last.
Hopefully not your last. Yes.
All right. So before we go, anything else you want to say or plug or
Uh, Not that I can think of. Definitely check out the website. Check out the Patreon. Definitely catch me every week over on Mutants and Masterminds Monday on the Green Ronin YouTube channel.
Yep.
Um,
Green Ronin Publishing is look for
yep.
that on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere. That's where you'll
Yeah.
find it. All right. Well, thank you again, Steve. It's been an awesome.
It's been a delight,
It's
Stan.
almost
Thank
hour
you.
and a half now. Just
Yeah.
flies by. And I will hope to find an excuse to have you back on soon
I'd love that. Thanks.
because you know what, I would just love, you know, forget the I don't forget the recording because that's the only way it'll happen. But I would love to just sit down and talk more superhero stuff and game,
Mm.
just kind of switch it specifically from a conversation about you to a
Hmm.
brainstorming kind of.
Oh, yeah. I'd love that.
Oh, it'd be fun. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Hold on. I'm going to go out, do an outro, and you and I can say our goodbyes before this thunderstorm actually really rolls in.
Yeah, right. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
All right. So I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to say thank you again to Steve Kenson for stopping in and having this conversation with me. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you all, Michael J. Pastor and Chris Andrew. I saw that Linnea Lemon was in here. Hi, Linnea. Sorry I didn't talk to you earlier. I was too busy drawing and chatting with Steve. Please, everyone, as I say at the end of all of these, it's very helpful to me. It's helpful to this show and getting it to be seen by other people. If you will give it a thumbs up or a heart or whatever is the right thing for your platform, and after it's finished and it's on replay, if you could take the time to just leave a comment. These comments during the show are great. It shows great involvement while we're talking, but if it gets involvement afterwards when it's on replay, that's when the dreaded algorithm pays attention and starts to share it more widely. So I'd really appreciate it. You can say anything you want. You can just say hi, Stan, or if there was something here that spoke to you or you want to hear us talk about more, leave it in there. I'd really appreciate it. Until then, well, until next week when I'm not 100% sure who my guest is going to be, I will say thank you to you all again, and I'll see you tomorrow night for another episode of Random Encounters, my improv cartooning show where if you're in the live chat, you can help me figure out what it is I'm going to be drawing. And then I'll see you next week with another interview. Oh, you know what? Here's another thing. On Friday, if you go to Kobold Press Publishing. I don't remember what their website is, but Kobold Publishing, they have their Kobold Con, an online game thing this weekend, and they're going to be announcing a game that I have something to do with. 11 a.m. Friday Pacific time, 11 a.m. Pacific time. I'm going to be part of an announcement they're making. So, koboldpress.com. Thanks, Steve has passed that to me behind the scenes. Koboldpress.com. Check it out. Kobold Con is happening, and at 11 a.m. on Friday, I will be part of an event where they're announcing a new game that I had a fair amount to do with. So come on and check that out, and I'll talk about it next week or something. So that's it. I'm out of here. You're out of here. Take care, everyone. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.